So so first, so this meeting, just a reminder, this meeting is governed under the CNCF Code of Conduct, which essentially boils down to being nice to each other. And yeah, what so again, like we have light attendance today. I think it's probably due to holidays and also the Zoom wrangling we had. But if you haven't put your name in the attendees list here, so this will be great. I think we have the first item from Shri Ram, who I don't see is on the call. So maybe I'll just add a parking lot here. And add this item for next week. And let's talk about dynamic auth. So Guy, I know you have a pretty terrible voice. So let me just start. Well, it's
Yeah,
probably sound. Huh?
I'll do my best. Yeah. So
Yeah.
this is a pull request that I opened a while ago as a follow up on the backend CRD and the access policy API, right? So and it's meant to be an extension of the access policy, which as of today, in the way we merged the domain recently, um, is meant to define access control, static access control lists, right? So this additional API that in one of the last meetings, maybe the last one we had, we kind of agreed on exploring with the possibility of like actually extending the access policy API rather than having a separate CRD, is meant for an, in the lack of a better word, dynamic authorizations, in the sense that instead of having static rules defined inside of the policy, you would replace those for some anchors with trusted sources of identity or trusted servers for verifying the identity of the requester, and or enforcing authorization. Uh, so I proposed four different methods for implementing those in a dynamic way, and those were um, supporting OpenID Connect service for verifying JOTs, um, then common expression language CEL for representing some simple pattern matching authorization rules, and two other ones based on the Kubernetes RBAC. So basically implementations of the Kubernetes token review API and Kubernetes subject access review API. Those two last ones, I think they were a bit of a contention point. Not everybody was on board with the idea of building on top of the Kubernetes authorization system for implementing all for network traffic, which I understand. Indeed, it does require some tweaking with the API server to avoid overloading the API server in this case, depending on the scale we're talking about. So I do understand. And I think one of the agreements were, even though I cannot really find this in the document, so please, Lior, you may have to refresh my mind here if there's anything wrong here. We agreed that number one, evaluating the option of not introducing yet another CRD, but rather modifying the access policy one. And number two, maybe moving to a different pattern where instead of having all those methods hard coded in the API, we would switch that to a model of extension where different providers would decide to implement different auth methods. So, for example, maybe we do not have a Kubernetes auth as a start, only OIDC, and those would be in the form of a provider extension. Thanks to David, who I saw just joined the call. And in fact, we even have a diagram representing that new model. But yeah, I'll hand it over to you, Lior.
Yeah, let me first share the diagram as well. So yeah, that's great. Appreciate you and David Bose doing the work here. This is this is the diagram we were talking about. So yeah, I mean, I think from my side, I think there's two things actually in this PR. So one is the ability to basically, I mean, put it this way, like the extensibility part, which makes like, okay, right now I have basically the integration with an IDP, right, with an identity provider, which I identify as important. And more importantly, I think the way I think is important to engage in this PR is like the design on how this extensibility works, right? Like just picking on one example, right? Key clock, right? So like, okay, how do we define this? And I think this is one of the things that came up in the last meeting where we discussed about maybe exploring the idea of like defining the extensibility point, which kind of somehow relates to David's diagram, and basically have everyone just plug in their own, as long as we're defining the protocol basically. And the other thing I identify in this PR, the other bullet, is like the dynamic nature of not just doing static policies, right? Like as an example, cell is one of the things you suggested, which obviously common, and like just having a way of dynamically define or collect whatever the policy that dynamically define entities or or other things, and just like avoiding the need for everyone to just come and change the policy every time there's a new agent, every time there's a new entity or parameter they want to allow or deny. So is this a fair separation first?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I totally agree. And you covered that well. The reason why I raised my hand was precisely to make this clarification of what I meant by the dynamic of auth, right? That's what I wanted to convey. The fact that as a user, you should be able to write a policy once and do not have to touch it because you got new agents on board in the system or because you have new tools deployed to the system, right? So if you want to change something regarding authentication or authorization, in this scenario, you would do that with a proper authentication server, with a proper authorization server, but not by modifying the Kubernetes resource. That is the idea. So you write the Kubernetes resource just once, and you say, I trust this OAuth server here. So all the identities coming from this with a given audience, for example, right? I will trust them. They are already validated identities. And that suffices for authentication. And as for authorization, maybe all you need is a required scope, or maybe a simple cell rule that says, hey, if the user has if the JOT has a claim groups that includes a value X and is trying to access any of the tools in that also matches this particular pattern, then we let traffic go through. You know what I mean? So you can keep onboarding new tools, and you can keep getting new identities, and you do not have to modify the policy every time. Yeah. Thanks for yeah.
So yeah, I think that's oh sorry, I think Gloria you had your hand up before me probably.
No, I was just again always learning new things, and I'm willing to do so here. I think I understand sort of where we want to route it externally to do the authorization and whatnot with the different providers that can provide their own implementation. But I'm curious, like, what is the inline identity rule or the inline authorization rule? How is that expressed? Is that still, yeah, maybe just a clarification there.
Yeah, the way I understood that, David is also here, right? So he was the one using those terms. But the way I understood was those are a direct reference to the current API we have, the access policy one, where we have the list of principles in the policy and the list of tools in the policy that you want to authorize.
Yeah, that's exactly how I've seen it. If you have a more simpler use case, you can still do that without having to call out to an external provider.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks for clarifying.
So yes, so basically, I think we should track them separately, because oftentimes I think when we talk about him in not this, like when we talk about this proposal, I think it's important to identify the two separate goals, right? And one of the goals, as you said, like the dynamically not needing to change the policy, which I think is important. But I think even more important than this is the ability, which I think the proposal is also defined, the ability to even go into like identity provider. And this ability would specifically also define, or would require to define, the extensibility point, because we're not going to bring specific identity providers into the API, right? So like, and this extensibility point, as it is, like, this is the part which I would want to maybe elaborate on, like how do we do something that kind of like it's basically a plug, like what do we need? Like, is it simply x.z, like something that reminds the extensibility point that we had, that we have in gateway, or like what's your thought about it, Guy? Like, and then we can talk about the dynamic auth in the other part of this meeting, or depends how much
Sure,
we have.
if we need to. Yeah, I personally find the accessibility aspect of it the more interesting one for us to discuss for sure. And I do have a couple of thoughts, right? One of the concerns I have with this model, and by concerns I do not mean that necessarily I'm seeing this as a bad thing. I'm just saying that I couldn't make up my mind 100% about it. Is with this model, we would be switching to a model where we do not follow the same pattern of policy attachment from gateway API, which was thought for at the maximum of two kinds of resources, the policy and the target, right? Rather, we're moving to a different pattern, which is not a bad one, right? But it's more in line with the binding model, the binding pattern, where you have the target, you have the policy, and you have a third kind of resource in the middle that establishes the binding between one and the other, which would be what the auth rule, the auth scheme in this particular diagram would be doing, right? It would be binding a backend to one of the extension points. Because this is not it's not the same as the filter that we have in some of the routes from Gateway API at the same time, right?
What do you mean? What do you mean binding a backend? Like for the way I actually, maybe I got it wrong, but the way I got it is like, say the extensibility point at this specific thing is the auth scheme, but again, I'm trying to remove the focus from the dynamic nature of it, and just on the extensibility part, right? This is why we also probably suggested like maybe doing an access policy, but like the when you say binding, like, because when I reasoned about it, I was like, okay, one of the first things is like providing the identity, right, and verifying the identity, and then
sure, go ahead.
No, you're good.
Yeah, that is a direct reference to how folks involved with the API machinery would call it. So, for example, in Kubernetes RBAC, the way you establish authorization requires, even though we recognize using two kinds of resources, in the end, we're talking about three kinds of resources. We have the target of the resource that we're specifying the row, we have the row, and then we have the row binding. So the binding is the one that connects the two things together, right? So the users on one side and the rows on the other side. So in this case, we also have a three kinds of resources kind of model here, right? So we have the auth scheme, we have the target, which as of today, we would only accept the backend, and we have the extension point. Nothing wrong with that. I'm just saying that this is slightly different from the policy attachment model from Gateway API.
But so okay, so let's step back. So this is why this is good, because this is why this is why some of the feedbacks yesterday, like last call, which you acknowledge, are maybe we explore, and again, maybe we explore the access policy having that. Now, here's how I reason about it, and leave the CRDs that we have right now. Again, like everything is in a prototyping, we could throw everything tomorrow, right? But leave it aside. So in my perspective, it's like we have the general, let's call it basic authorization, which like, okay, I want this tool to be, I want this agent to be allowed to call this tool on this server, right? This backend. Backend is the CRD that we have. Now, obviously, backend is your identity.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but when we say basic, so I need to be sorry to be pedantic about it, because I want to be clear whether we're talking about scale, as in it's just a small number of identities and small number of tools, or we're talking about exactly the rule that you said. Only this, and this could be unlimited number of identities, can access these tools, which can also be unlimited.
Yeah, this is good to be pedantic on this, actually. I think when I say basic, I like, for me, it's like it was more of a catch-all for the two things. It's basic because you don't have any fancy cells and everything that, like, for example, the one we have now. But more importantly, when I said basic, I mean you don't have any different third-party provider that's providing you a more fancy type of identities or a more advanced type. Like, just let's pick on one example. Let's say you take the service account, or like things we are familiar with, the mesh identity model, right? Like, you just, you have the way David put it, like inline rules, which would inevitably probably be, we'll try to keep them simple, because the more context and capabilities we have, the more variety we have across different implementations. So usually what ends up is like the inline ones are usually the simple ones. And now picking on this, like, so you would have this authorization, and then within our world, right, the agentic stuff, like oftentimes, if not most of the times, right, like you would want a more I call it fancy, it's a terrible word of like a fancy type of authentication, like, and as you clarified in your gap, right, in your proposal, and more sometimes you would want even a more fancy type of a specific type of validating the identity, and not even talking about authorization even, I'm just talking about authentication. So if I step back from all this, like, so I'm saying, like, one of the things, and then this goes back to the separation, one of the things that we need to identify is like, hey, we have an authorization rule, okay, a rule, leave it aside if it's multiple rules, but we have an authorization rule, and this authorization rule, it does follow the Gateway API policy attachment, which has a policy, which has a target and a policy. And now, to this authorization rule, we probably need a way to extend it in a way that you don't just specify this identity, I don't know, this string as identity, or like, you probably want to have this extensibility part, which you send the request to, like, you offload your identity provider to like you plug in your identity provider, put it simply. And when you plug into the identity provider, you can do validation, or you can just provide the identity. Down the road, you can do token exchange, all that, right? But like, again, the identity part is not necessarily the authorization, like doing the authorization, right? Is this fair? Like, you could still have an identity being provided from a third party, but an inline rule.
Yeah, I got to be honest. I do not know if I follow 100% what you said, right? But let me try to pick on some of the things that I got. So, number one, we use the word authorization and we use authentication multiple times, and I want to make sure that we are not conflating those two things together, right? It's a very common misconception, thinking that you should only authenticate users that are authorized to do something. That is not how authentication works, right? Authentication is just you should trust as many identities as you can, right? So that's the authentication. So all you want is to trust identities. All the rest is authorization, right? So just to be clear.
Well, sorry, so you're saying validating that the identity is what it is?
When I say the validated identity, is because we do not we're not responsible for implementing authentication, in the sense that again, I don't know how to describe this, but effectively what I'm talking about is the requester presents an access token, presents something that it's short-lived, and you can validate, you can verify. And you verify that against some certificate. You say, I trust this identity. Since I can verify this, right? So I trust that you have a valid access token. You're not really doing authentication. This is not the same. Authentication was performed by whoever issued that access token.
Okay, so just to align with the terminal, to align with the terminology, so when we talk about validating the identity, again, like, are you considering this part of authorization?
No. Validating the identity is, I'm using this term because this is not authentication and this is not authorization.
Okay.
This is just validating that you trust that requester. The requester is who it says it is, right? Some people would define that is the definition of authentication, but there's an important difference here. The difference is you perform that usually offline and at every request, right? Whereas the actual authentication that resulted in the issuing of that access token in the first place was performed online and just once, right? So the agent would go to the authentication server, would get a token, then start sending requests that passes through whatever is enforcing that policy. At every request, in the spirit of zero trust, you need to verify that requester is who it claims to be, right? The way you do that is you have a list of trusted sources of identity, and you only verify if that presented identity, that could be an OAuth access token, it could be an OIDC ID token, it could be TLS client certificate, anything, right? You only validate that was issued offline by a trusted source of identity. That's it. And then the rest is authorization, if we need anything else, right? So we don't need to get into the rabbit hole of these definitions, right? All I want to point out here is that if you want to do something like, but can this particular access token access this tool? We're talking about authorization. Like by definition, this is authorization, no longer identity verification or authentication, right?
But you may want to do both, right?
Yes, absolutely. We may want to do both.
So my point is, like, for authorization rules, you could have basic or inline, whatever. Like, you could have authorization rules, and I'm saying, like, the validation part, extended validation, and different identity providers is something that extends the authorization. It doesn't do authorization, I understand, but it extends the like, it could extend because, like, would you be like, for every authorization, it's probably most commonly, right, there is authentication before, right? So because you authorize, right? So like,
yeah, there are exceptions, but yeah,
there are exceptions. I can do authorization based on strings, right? But I'm saying, like, so I think one of the most common use cases, right, is like plugging in something that will do validation and or different authentication that Kubernetes provides, like, right? So basically doing the authorization rule, or in our terminology, having an access policy with something basic. Again, I'm ignoring all the part of your PR that's talking about dynamically sales and everything. That's what I'm trying to do in this. Like, basically, talking about this to individually and separately, because in my mind, and if I'm wrong, tell me how it's connected. But in my mind, it's a different thing. Like, I can still specify rules and what tools are allowed and everything manually in the policy, but still having a way to extend my policy and have an identity provider providing the identity for me, right? Or validating the identity for me.
Yes, you can. I'm not sure we're talking about the same thing. Obviously, you can list in an access policy today things like agent X can access tool Y. We can do that, right? But you cannot represent something like any agent that is member of a group A can access any tool whose name starts with B _. You cannot do that.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay. Please continue.
But I guess what you're trying to say here, like, so I'm really
this is the kind of use case we want to support. This is what I've been trying to communicate since a couple of months now, right? The idea of aggregations. we cannot imagine that for enterprise level applications, we're going to be able to list all those identities and all those tools by name every time. Sometimes you need to do aggregations using concepts like groups, concepts like patterns on the name of the tools, etc., right? So we're trying to find a solution for a user, how a user would represent those authorization rules that cannot be represented by listing the exact name of each one of the tools and each one of the identities.
Would this include in, how would I put it? When I'm reasoning about the whole use case, like would this in like necessarily include that like where's the authorization going to be performed in this case? Is it also
that's an excellent question. I think I know what you mean, because one of the last comments I see in the pull request was somebody asking how one would implement this in Envoy. And being quite frankly, I don't think we should care about this at this point, right? This is not meant to be, we should not decide API based on the underlying implementations, potential implementations. We should define API based on the use cases and the user experience. And then the implementation should come up with ways of implementing those. And by the way, implementing cell expressions in any of the existing gateways, it's a no-brainer, right? So that's not any concern. And that's what we with the kind of thing we want to prototype here, right? We want to show that there's a way to do it, right? But, so I propose OO and OIDC and cell as a starting point, right? Willing to move Kubernetes for the next step if it's still a contention point, no problem, right? But those two things are very easy to show how one could implement in any of the existing policy enforcement points that we know of today.
My question is like, wouldn't this, and maybe I'm biased because of existing patterns that I'm familiar with Kubernetes networking, but like, wouldn't this actually be fairly possible to just implement in a callout? Like as an example, like, you know, like I just delegate my auth to a different server, and then this different server, or like, you know, would be loaded with the authorization rule. Like,
you mean implement an external, right? Yeah, but that adds, you know, more latency. You know, you need to issue a request to an external service. Why would you need that, right?
Why is it okay?
Super lightweight.
One second.
What did you not understand? What is the contention point with?
No, let's speak
methods.
Let's speak on this for a minute. So why is it another hope? Because it feels to me that right now, with what we have, and this gap as well, like this proposal as well, like it feels to me that you would anyway delegate to a different server, right?
Nope.
To provide, like, let's say.
Nope. That is the case for Kubernetes token review and subjective review. It's not the case for IDC nor cell.
No, you're talking about RBAC now? No, I'm confused.
Saying that I propose 4 different methods, right? 4 different.
Yeah, but leave the RBAC aside for a minute. I'm talking about
leaving the RBAC aside. No, zero. There's no extra help. I'm proposing implementing those in the policy enforcement point. So it's there's no policy decision point that returns like a Boolean answer, and then you wait, you know, for enforcement to enforce.
But wouldn't we? Well, now I remember like one of the comment threads. But wouldn't it be like weird? Not weird. Weird is not the right word, but like there is organizations that has like different organization has different like auth, like, you know, as John pointed out, like LDAP, like how do you envision this project tracking, like, because auth is always, it's pretty hard, like it's not even a common denominator between implementation, it's even common denominator between implementation, multiply organizations, like, you know, different organizations have their super different methods. So would you envision that, for example, you know, let's say like the data planes, not even the control, the data planes would be on the hook for implementing many different auth methods?
I replied to John in the pull request, right? In my opinion, we should not use any of those different ways to do auth, not to do any auth at all. We cannot say that, oh, because some people use LDAP, we should not do OIDC. Yeah, but some people use OIDC. And it happens to be quite important in MCP, for example. So we should start somewhere, right?
But
this is a proposal to start somewhere and to prototype with something.
Okay, but I'm saying, like, what problem are we? Okay. I mean, that's fair. I mean, ideally, I would love to have John and others here, but because I see what you mean, right? Like, in my mind, it's like, okay, what is the problem we're solving? But then you could respond with because right now it could be with a call out, but then you could respond with a fair point of, like, we're doing standardization of things that should be, like, we want to standardize. So I think that's also a fair response.
Yeah,
I think,
for example, I think OIDC and CEL are very good starting points. Those are technologies that are part of the stacks that we are all used to in with the protocols we've been dealing with. So OIDC, even though it's not technically, MCP, even though it's not technically OIDC, it's OAuth 2.1. But let's face it, anything related to authentication in the end is going to implement OIDC. And number two, CEL is spread all over in Kubernetes. So the API server speaks CEL, right, for validation. And it's been replacing validating webhooks for years now with CEL validation, given the power it has. So I think it's a very good starting point. If we want, to make, apologies. If we want to make the lives of the implementations easier, those are also good choices, in my opinion, right? We know that a good deal of the implementations of this will be based on Envoy. Envoy happens to have a very good engine for CEL. I understand CEL has variations across different implementations, so that's one of the things to address for sure, right? For example, different extensions that are enabled. John raised a very good point on, if you want to write CEL expressions, you need to define some bindings. Things like what, or variables, as John called it, right? In CEL terminology, those are called bindings. But what, for example, identity means, if you put this keyword identity within a CEL expression, right? So those things require to be very well defined. And I'm not by no means, saying this is a simple or easy task to do, right? Those are things that we need to address for sure. I'm saying that if we get this done right, I think we will end up with a very good API that is focused on real use cases, that is focused on user experience rather than what the different implementations can do. Sure, we could just implement again Envoy external authorization, right? Because it's easy, because it's Envoy. But is it really what the users want? To be forced to implement another service, be forced to live with another hop again, right? I know it's easy for us, it's easy for the implementations, but for the user, is it really the best?
This is a good point. So I think, like, one of the things that, in my opinion, is, like, should we? I mean, it's definitely so. What are we doing, right? Like, we're trying to provide solutions, right? Like, for people running agents on Kube, right? And I think even if this goes forward, right? Like even if we're moving forward, and it would be great to move forward, but, like, even if we're moving forward with this kind, and, like, as you said, bringing CEL and all that and everything, I think we should still allow the external call out, right? Because there's going to be people who would need different things, and there's going to be people who would need different things that Envoy or any data plane or control planes are not allowing or providing. I think if we inverse the order, and then I have another question after that, but, like, if we inverse the order and we provide this extensibility point, which, again, I don't think it's defined right now, I mean, well, you're saying it's easy, I agree, but like implementing this in easy, but like basically defining how this API is going to look together and how the external callout would look. I think would it provide us a way of like, and again, especially in this prototyping phase where like we provide very exactly this question of like, this is how the user journey is working today. We probably are looking into standardizing bits of it, and then users would be able to say, oh, these are the bits that I would want to standardize. These are the bits that are more important. These are the bits that are less. Again, like when you basically say this use case, I think it very much resonates with me, at least. I'm not sure what other people like, right? You want to allow these groups, and you want to allow these groups to allow this set of tools. You don't want people to change the policies every time new agent and new tool comes and go. Obviously, different organizations would have different needs. Like some organizations that I'm aware of, like would actually prefer the explicit approach. But I think it's it all depends on the persona. But I think the dynamic part is pretty important. But I think no matter like we definitely need this external call out to begin, in my opinion, first. Why am I saying first? Because again, it's more easy, like put it this way, and it provides the solution. And now I want to end up with a question. I think I talked with David about it. I'm not sure I don't remember what forum, but so you have some use cases, probably, Guy, also, like you have some use cases where, for example, you would want to integrate key clock, for example, right? So walk me through the use. Can you? I mean, I know David and you has your hands up, but like, I really want to have some time talking about the use case specifically with key clock, and the third-party integrations. So yeah, I mean, you could, if you want to respond to what I said first and then go for it, it's fine. But like, I'd really want to understand the use case.
Sure. Do you mean keycloak for authentication or for authorization as well?
Yeah, I think for authentication, but again, I want to hear from you because, and I think David
Keycloak implements OIDC. So we implement OIDC. We just say in our policy, keycloak realm as the issuer URL, and that's all. What the implementation we have to do is implement OIDC discovery, goes to keycloak, fetches the JSON Web key sets, for validating keycloak issued ID tokens, and that's it. So the agents would go to keycloak, get an access token, and then start to send a request to whatever is being protected behind this particular.
And how would you do the authorization with this flow?
Authorization, excellent question. So depends what kind of authorization you want, right? So if you want something that could be handled by keycloak itself as part of OAuth, such as based on scopes, then it's part of the authentication. This merging is authentication. Keycloak can handle by just specifying the scopes. And if you do not match the required scopes, you don't even get the access token in the first place. If you need anything beyond that, which from my experience happens to be most of the cases, it's not scopes do not suffice, then you need something like a JOT claim check. You need to check something inside of the JOT, a claim of the JOT. And for that, you need, go.
I'm saying, like, I was asking, like, what's the common case that you're having with the keycloak for authentication? Keycloak for authentication and authorization outside.
Yeah, that's the common case that I have with keycloak. Right, we happen to implement with keycloak. It's the most popular now IDP that we support in the implementation we represent. Yeah. So yeah, the common use case is all the clients, they get tokens issued with keycloak. They use those tokens, to send the requests. Those tokens then we have sell to verify a claim and check if some claim matches. Keycloak, for example, has realm access claim that includes one of the configurations you can do.
But the verification, the policy enforcement happens on where?
In the gateway, typically, or in the proxy.
Okay, so this is so this comes back to how do you enable this flow? Because this is a full user journey flow, right? With the APIs we have now.
What do you mean the APIs we have now?
Like, I want this flow to be represented with the Cube Agentic networking. How do you do that?
Right. The old scheme API I proposed, what you would do is, I think I have an example exactly for the use case you described, right? So where you have in the document, we have OIDC in the authentication part with only one setting, which is the issue URL. And in the authorization, you have cell, and you have one cell expression that matches identity dot, which gives you access to the claims in that jot, right? Identity dot jot dot and the claims, and equals something, or there's a value in a list that is one of the claims of the jot, and so on.
I have a follow-up, but David, you have your hand up for a while.
Yeah, my question is about conformance for, I guess, gateway providers that eventually implement what comes out of this. So I guess this question is for you, Guy, and I'm just still running through my head. So are we ultimately expecting gateway providers to implement like the access policy or alt scheme, whatever it ends up being, and it has built-in support for OIDC validation? You specify an issuer URL, for example, or something like that, and that's baked in. But for anything else, initially, you can make a call out to some external thing that does identity checking. Is that kind of the direction that this is going?
Correct. Yes. In my mind, the implementation shouldn't matter, right? So if there's a gateway implementation that happens to have all the resources to implement this built-in, that's the perfect scenario, right? But let's say there's an implementation that does not cannot implement evaluators for those cell expressions, or just doesn't care. Then you can have an extension on top of that that makes a call out to another service whose only function is to evaluate cell expressions. You can do that, right? Transparently to the user. Obviously, the user, once it gets there's another hop involved, that's a different problem, right? But yeah, it's an implementation detail we could argue.
Yeah, I got you. So the reason I'm asking that is because I can see, like, already in some of the comments here, like how do we draw that line about what makes it in what would eventually be a conformance check versus no, you got to implement that via some extension point. I think that's could potentially be a continuous point of contention, and that'd be something I'd worry about.
Yeah. How can we start from something that's less? So there's two goals. I mean, one goal I think is very aligned with what Guy said, is like we don't. I mean, when we can, we don't want to be opinionated on whether something is an extension or not. We just want to express the capability, and implementation will decide if it is doing it with extensions, with like a call out, basically. But the other thing is like, how can we make the something that's very useful without requiring standardization on things that may be very hard to standardize, like cell, or like cell is not. I mean, there's this variations, right? Like, but like, and Kubernetes have cell. I mean, we could go, but like, ORDC or like LDAP, Kerberos, all that. Like, how do we? Is there a way? Maybe it's a question for you. Is there a way, Guy, to provide the same functionality without specifying its OIDC? For example, maybe get this information somewhere else. Just trying to brainstorm together.
I'm not sure if I follow. I mean, something that is more generic than OIDC?
Something that would not require you to add every different type of authentication to the API.
Right.
So, like, again, like, let's start from if I'm starting from the most generic part, is like, okay, just do the call out. This is your server, do the call out. Then you're not. But then, like, is there something that's in the middle where?
I'm conscious of time, so I need to comment something on the call. One of the things to call out that worries me is the fact that I want to make sure that we're not thinking envoy external authorization. right? Because that's one way to make callout. A user could just as easily come and say, yeah, but I have my own system here, right? I need to issue a request to, I don't know, some Spice DB server where I'm handling, distributed authorization using Reback. So why do I care about the external authorization? I do not, my server does not implement that particular protocol, right? So that is the implementation detail. So sometimes call out can be an implementation detail. Some other times it's the kind of thing that the user will want to express in the API and say, hey, I need for whatever is enforcing this to perform a call out to this endpoint here, right? In that case, we need more than that. We need a protocol more than just an endpoint, right? We just say, okay, so what is it? What kind of request we need to send there, right?
We don't have to have the protocol inside Kubernetes, though. You could have the protocol inside an implementation API. As an example, like
true,
like Istio extension providers, right? Like you have the protocol defined somewhere else.
I agree. No, I agree. So I think eventually we can get that, right? OIDC is the reason why as I said, I'm being opinionated. The reason why I picked it is because, as I said before, it happens to be part of one of the most important protocols we want to support, right? MCP. So that's one. And it can be performed offline, the verification. So it does not require a call out, right? And sell for the very same reasons, right? It's embedded in the platform, does not require a call out, etc. So those are the reasons I picked those two. For similar reasons, I also propose Kubernetes Auth, right? And but even though I do understand that people are struggling, more with that second idea.
Okay, I guess we're 1 minute. Yeah, I mean, I think we should follow more in the PR. I'll try to summarize some of my thoughts and takeaways from this meeting.
May I ask you one last question, Lior? Obviously, the goal here is, to solve users' problems, as you mentioned before. But I think there's a more immediate goal for us, which I understand is to show something in the next KubeCon EU, right? So I'm guessing that is the what we want to achieve with this, right? We want to come up with a set of APIs that we can show off, in the next KubeCon to collect feedback. Am I right?
Yeah, more. I think collecting the feedback is good to happen before KubeCon. I mean, obviously not with a complete set of perfect APIs, but I mean, we want to make sure we are doing, I mean, something for people who needs to run agents, and people are coming to KubeCon on Cube and doing all the governance APIs, and people who are coming to KubeCon are actually on the lookout for solutions for this. So yes, so basically KubeCon is a very good opportunity to present things that you have or have working or are working on. So yeah.
And I believe with the feedback we collect there, we have a very good chance of read rate, and think maybe we find out that the ways we decided, to implement all for Agentic, it's not what most people want in the community, right? And they have some other thing in mind, and we reiterate, we try something else, right?
Yeah. With an external call out, though, I agree 100%. What I'm saying, with an external call out, regardless of this one, right? What I'm saying is a good way of providing extensibility in the API that's not opinionated. Are you agree? Like, so that's what I'm saying. Like, anyway, I believe it's a good way to have. It's a good thing to have, and it does solve the problem in a parallel track to try and define the things that are useful for the users, as you put it, right? Like doing sell, definitely useful. Doing sell, definitely useful, right?
Don't get me wrong. I'm all in favor of the call out. I just do not want to overuse it for things that we do not need it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, trying to be. I'll definitely follow up now today, both in the PR start some. Unfortunately, we had light attendance. I anticipate this will happen until the end of the year as well. Yeah, I mean, I think I have a few ideas for what will be useful to add to this PR. Maybe it will help other people reviewing it in a way that people that hadn't had a chance to join this meeting and understand the whole context. But yeah, I appreciate providing it. But yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone. Cheers.